Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey. I'm joined in the studio tonight by William Duguid, and of course, we will be bringing you all of tonight's top stories. William, how are you this evening?
Glad to be indoors, I think would sum it up.
Keeping safe
Good to
in
be
the.
here.
Yes, glad to have you here too. So, of course, we start with our first story. As always, the Ukraine war update is day 603. Vladimir Putin called the US delivery of long range tactical ballistic missiles to Kyiv another mistake by the United States in his first public comment since an unprecedented Ukrainian airstrike destroyed helicopters at two airfields in Russian occupied territory this week. The Russian president also claimed that the delivery of the ATACMS missiles, which can strike targets more than 100 miles away and deliver salvos with cluster munitions, would simply prolong Ukraine's agony. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has said that images of Hungary's Prime Minister shaking hands with Putin were very, very unpleasant and defied logic given Budapest's past history with Moscow. Viktor Orban and Putin held talks in China on Tuesday, with the Hungarian Prime Minister telling the Russian president that he had never wanted to oppose Moscow and is trying to salvage bilateral contacts. Russian news agencies have reported that Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in North Korea on Wednesday. The TASS news agency reported that the 2 day visit was expected to lay the groundwork for a future trip to the country by Putin. The trip took place days after the US said Pyongyang had transferred munitions to Russia for the war in Ukraine. Russian attacks in the past 2 days have killed at least 10 civilians in Ukraine and damaged the power grid in northeastern city of Kharkiv, according to Ukrainian officials. Among the targets hit was a residential building in the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. The lower house of the Russian parliament has passed the second and third readings of a bill that revokes Russia's ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Both were passed unanimously by 415 votes to 0. Ukraine's foreign ministry later condemned the steps taken and urged the international community to respond to Russia's provocations. The White House has said that President Biden will give a primetime speech to America on the war in Israel and the war in Ukraine today, responding to concerns that the war between Israel and Hamas may divert military and international support away from Kyiv. President Biden is to propose a joint $100 billion package for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the migration crisis at the US Mexico border this week. The package is intended to bypass congressional chaos and bring Democrats who have sought additional aid for Kyiv for weeks together with Republicans who want funds to tighten controls onto the southern border. French President Emmanuel Macron reaffirmed his country's support for Ukraine during a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday. General Alexander Ternizhiki, in charge of Ukraine's operations in the south, has said Ukrainian forces had partial success to the south of Robotyne. Robotyne is one of the group of villages in the south that Ukraine wants to secure as a part of its advance towards the Sea of Azov, aimed at severing a land bridge linking Russian positions to the south and east. So lots of updates, lots to unpack there. The one that really stands out to me, William, is the nuclear issue and the reneging on nuclear test ban treaties. Obviously, this is very speculatory, but what do you think that this could mean for Russia's tactics in the war going forward?
Well, I think Russia is on manoeuvres at the minute because I think there's a strong possibility that the focus of the world will be diverted by the Middle East situation. I'm slightly heartened to hear Joe Biden talking about that when he addresses the US population later today. But I think I I think there's a grave danger of all sorts of world things spilling and escalating into something quite horrific, and everything that seems to be a step away from that, as this is problematic. And you can see that Russia's forming a lot of mini alliances. The one with Viktor Orban, for example, is the support there. is an unexpected thing. And it's interesting that that was concluded in China, because China is always in the background of this as well. And it will become a geopolitical issue sooner or later. And China will be, it's playing a game of long-term chess, just as it always does. Though, as ever, uncertainty, saber rattling, odd alliances being made, and lots to worry about, and always the fear that something will happen while the world's attention is distracted.
Yeah. And so we mentioned Israel and Gaza. That leads us on to our next story. Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has met Israel's President and Prime Minister on a visit to the country. Sunak said the UK stood in solidarity with Israel and called for humanitarian aid to be let into Gaza. Sunak supported Israel's right to defend itself and go after Hamas and to bring back the hostages, but it said it should be done in line with international law. The US government released an assessment saying Israel was not responsible for the explosion at a hospital in Gaza on Tuesday that the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry said killed hundreds of civilians. In a statement, White House National Security Council spokesperson Adrian Watson pointed to intelligence indicating that some Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip believed that the explosion was likely caused by an errant rocket or missile carried out by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The militants were still investigating what had happened. The statement, shared by CNN, adds the US government addresses that Israel was not responsible for the explosion that killed hundreds of civilians yesterday at the Al-Arabi hospital in the Gaza Strip. Our assessment is based on available reporting, including intelligence, missile activity, and open source video and images from the internet. There is skepticism in the Middle East about the Israeli and US assessment of the hospital blast, according to Jordan's Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi. Nobody is buying that narrative in this part of the world, Safadi told NBC News. The only way that people would entertain a different narrative is if there is an independent international inquiry into the tragedy that has happened with impeccable evidence that it was not Israel. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has agreed to open the Rafah border crossing into Gaza to allow 20 trucks with humanitarian aid. President Biden said Israel had agreed to allow the opening of the Egypt-Gaza border for deliveries of food, water, and medical supplies after an 11-day total blockade on condition that the humanitarian assistance was not diverted by Hamas for its own use. Machinery to repair roads has been sent through the Rafah border crossing from Egypt into the Gaza Strip in preparation for the delivery of some aid tomorrow. Gazan health officials say Israel's bombing so far has killed 3,785 people and has wounded more than 12,000. Israel says at least 203 people are being held hostage in Gaza, 4 more than its previous estimate of 199. The bodies of those 2 missing from the Nir Oz kibbutz in southern Israel have been found. A charity has warned that the lack of access to water in Gaza is a health crisis on the brink of explosion. So, William, US citizens have been warned within the context of this war that they should exercise heightened caution. Why do you think that the US government has taken this kind of position of insecurity internationally?
It's in line pretty well with the positions the US government has always taken. One doesn't wish to be cynical, but I do think that the US government's attitude to the entire Middle East situation from way back has been strongly biased towards the Israeli position and has effectively disregarded the very real restrictions that have been placed on people, particularly in Gaza, for quite some time. Now, in terms of the statements made about the Al-Ali missile, this one is almost impossible to opine on with any great certainty, and it's interesting how much certainty has been expressed by differing viewpoints about it, and this is part of the problem. I don't particularly think that Joe Biden's approach to it yesterday, talking about the other team being responsible for it quite struck the right tone. And I remain very concerned that the aid that is about to hopefully get to Gaza will be, one, inadequate, and two, under considerably more threat than you would wish to be the case. I remain very, very concerned about just the overall developments here. The lack of water is a real worry, and there will be casualties, not necessarily even of missile strikes wherever they come from, but just of lack of water, lack of fuel, lack of resources. And the world needs to be very careful that this does not now escalate into a major regional conflict, because that's the reason for saying to US citizens, you're in danger worldwide. There will be reactions. If it is a regional conflict, there will be reactions. You could argue that there have already been reactions, not against US citizens, but against Swedish citizens in Belgium. And that will only get worse. There needs to be a negotiated and just ceasefire, insofar as that's possible. And I say that knowing that it can never happen. There's just no way I can see it happening. But it's the only way we get out of this conflict that's gone on for decade upon decade and stretches back even before 1948, to be honest. It's it's just one of the things popping up all over the world at the minute that gives me all sorts of worry about how on earth we get out of this decade without major, major problems for all of us.
And you mentioned the possibility of it escalating into a regional war. What do you think the likelihood is that that could happen, and what potentially could that look like, or what could that entail?
Well, I think the regional war is likely to be carried out via Hezbollah, probably at Iran's behest from Lebanon. So I can see at some point a war in Lebanon. I don't think Iran will get directly involved, but then what will the reaction of the US British alliance and others be to that? And to what extent will we want to get involved? And where does it go from there? Because there will be some parties that see this as the way to settle things and to change the game and do things differently, not necessarily in a way which is particularly humanitarian or beneficial, but entrenches their own sort of power circles. So, like everything, it's kind of unpredictable, and I am no expert, but there is no sign that this is going to be anything other than a bloody mess for quite some time to come.
Yeah. So we are moving back to Scotland for the next story. The Met Office has issued a red severe weather warning as Storm Babbitt is expected to bring exceptional rainfall and impactful wind for some of later today and tomorrow. The red warning for rain covers parts of eastern Scotland, including Brechin, Forfar and Kirriemuir. It's in force from 1800 on Thursday through to midday on Friday. Chief Met Office meteorologist Jason Kelly said eastern parts of Scotland will see exceptional amounts of rainfall over the next few days, and the significant accumulations are likely to cause considerable impacts from Storm Babbitt. Responding to the highest level red weather warning issued for northeast of Scotland, Deputy First Minister Shona Robertson chaired a meeting of the Scottish Government's Resilience Room last night. The meeting was attended by Resilience partners, Transport Scotland, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and emergency services. The meeting set out the significant action being taken to protect the public to mitigate the severe disruption expected over the next few days. The red warning has been issued by the Met Office for parts of Angus and South Aberdeenshire, valid between 6 p.m. this evening and 12 midday tomorrow. People are urged to not travel and to stay home in affected areas, with exceptional levels of rain likely to result in significant disruption and danger to life. There is a further amber warning for rain covering parts of Stirling, Perthshire, Aviemore, Moray, Angus, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City from 6 a.m. this morning until 6 p.m. on Friday evening. In these amber areas, it is advised people should avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. In addition, there was an amber warning for wind in place in East Angus and eastern Aberdeenshire between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. today. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from their homes in Brecon due to threat of flooding, with reports of winds reaching up to 77 miles per hour. William, would you say that this is, one of the effects of global warming really coming to the fore here and affecting Scottish communities specifically?
Well, it may be. It's very likely that any major change in the weather um, is likely to be caused by something like global warming. This is basically the second big dump of rain, and a bigger one than the last one, in a 12-day period. And it's the phenomenon where a system appears over Scotland, or a part of Scotland in this case, and just stays there. Despite the wind, it just stays there for maybe 2 days or something like that, and just dumps rain on everybody. And this is we have seen major rainfall in the past. I mean, in 1974, at Sloy, there was, I think, 238 millimeters in a day. And it's that sort of record that the current system is potentially going to break in some places. So it's not unheard of. It's just that that the mantra with global warming is that these sort of things will happen more frequently. And it's happened pretty frequently in this month of October, that's for sure. And it's going to be a difficult thing long term to react to if this is going to be the pattern. But, it may be another time the jet stream is somewhere else and somebody else gets it. So difficult times, and I do feel for these people, particularly in Brecon, who are getting evacuated and who don't know what's going on, and also the wind being another factor in the situation here, and the possibility of power cuts. I know SSEN have manned up with, or staffed up rather, with I think 10 times their normal staff to deal with power cuts, and they've already had to deal with some. It's going to be a really tricky couple of days. Hopefully, if we can get through to Saturday, we can start getting something approaching normal life again. But even then, I think I would call canny just a bit. This is maybe the shape of things to come right enough.
Scary stuff, scary and very soggy. So,
Indeed.
next story of the night, there were chaotic scenes as the UK government forced asylum seekers to return to the Bibby Stockholm barge in Dorset more than 2 months after it was evacuated after this discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. Just Stop Oil protesters managed to stop the coach carrying the men to the vessel in Portland Port by blocking the causeway to the island, and claimed that the vehicle put their lives in danger by pushing through them. About 50 local people and campaigners gathered at the gates of the port to object to the men being returned to the facility, but also to welcome them back into their community. Candy Udwin of Dorset Stand Up to Racism, who was at the port gates, said Home Secretary Suella Braverman was making a political point by forcing them back on board the barge. The Home Office has said the barge is safe and will reduce the cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels, but the men have expressed fears about being returned. It is thought that about 30 men were on the bus that arrived at the port at lunchtime today. A further 45 are believed to be arriving on Friday. So, William, the thing that stands out to me in that is the men have expressed fear. They express that they're scared. They don't want to go back on this barge. How cruel and inhumane is this treatment of vulnerable people?
It's the hostile environment taken to the nth degree, in my view. Um, there's nothing to suggest that these are other than legitimate asylum seekers. They've already faced a whole lot of fear and worry. That's why they had to get away. That's why they had to come here. And they're being dumped on what effectively looks like a prison ship. And right now is the good time for them because, by Monday there'll only be 75 of them and they won't be particularly cooped up. But the overall capacity, well, the real capacity is probably 250, but 500 is going to be the capacity because you're going to be sharing each room with somebody ultimately. They've already had an outbreak of disease on the boat. And all of this is being done, in my view, for show. Yes, it is a political thing. It's a deterrent. It's a deterrent to people who um, are perfectly legitimately seeking asylum, and it's unacceptable. And it wouldn't be necessary. Well, it should never be necessary. But if we had an asylum system that processed people efficiently and with some modicum of justice, then we wouldn't be needing to resort to ridiculous things like that. The baby Stockholm is one of the most expensive ways you could think of housing asylum seekers. Simply process the people properly and find places for them in society if they're staying, because they can help us. They're not just nobodies, they're electrical engineers, architects, and others. You know, these are skilled people. These are people just like us who just happen to have been born in a place or to have lived in a place where there has been such trouble that they've had to leave. And we should really, all of us, be adopting a more compassionate attitude to them. I know that opinion locally, where the baby Stockholm is kind of split, but you know there are a lot of people, and I'm glad to see it, supporting them with their hearts in the right place, and I think that's the way forward. But a new approach from government is really what's needed here.
And do you have much faith that should there be a change in administration at the general election next year, do you believe that this policy will be scrapped by Labour, or do you think that we'd see a continuation of these kinds of policies?
Well, since it is an expensive way of dealing with asylum seekers, and the incoming, if they are incoming, Labour government doesn't think it's going to have that much money to spend initially, maybe they'll scrap it on financial grounds. However, I don't think they might be minded to scrap it on moral grounds, because it seems to me that the whole political outlook has shifted to the right under the Tories, quite significantly to the right with the Tories, and Labour has simply moved into that vacuum. So they're not quite the party that their supporters might have thought they were in the past. And I don't think Keir Starmer is the man to lead them back to the socially conscious left sort of thing that we would recognise from years past. So no, I don't see them as being the agents of change, particularly here. I remain to be convinced. So let's wait and see.
So our next story of the night, The Guardian is reporting that a controversial fund to support startups during the COVID pandemic by Rishi Sunak invested £2 million in companies linked to his wife. Carousel Ventures, a company part-owned by Akshata Murthy's venture capital firm, received an investment of £250,000 from the Future Fund to help fund its ownership of a luxury underwear business called Heist Studios. It is the fourth business linked to Murthy revealed to have received an investment from the fund set up by Sunak to support startups when he was the Chancellor during the COVID pandemic. None of Murthy's investments, which benefited from the UK Government Future Fund, appear publicly on the Prime Minister's register of interests, raising concerns over a lack of transparency and the potential for a perceived conflict of interest, given that Sunak launched the scheme to help startups, a sector in which his wife is a known investor. Other investors in Carousel Ventures via an intermediary fund include Andrew Griffin, a Conservative MP who is now a Treasury Minister under Sunak, a businessman, Brent Hoberman, who publicly pleaded with Sunak to bring in such a scheme and to save our startups. The £250,000 loan to Carousel Ventures has now been converted into equity, so the UK taxpayer owns a small stake in the company. As well as Carousel Ventures, Murthy also has shareholdings in New Craftsman, which received £250,000 Future Fund loans, Mrs. Wordsmith, which got £1.3 million from the fund, and Dig Me Fitness, which received an unknown amount of over £125,000 according to the terms of the fund. All three businesses have subsequently gone into administration. The heavily criticised Future Fund was launched by Sunak in May 2020 to help emerging businesses during the pandemic. In 2021, a former non-executive director at the British Businesses Bank told an audit committee meeting that many of the Future Fund companies would have a limited chance of sufficient growth and would become zombie businesses. Number 10, and Sunak have always argued that Murty has a right to privacy over her investments and that the Prime Minister has received official advice that he does not need to declare them. The Ministerial Register declares that Murty owns Catamaran Ventures and is a venture capital investor with a number of shareholdings without specifying them. In April 2023, Sunak was forced to declare that his wife had a shareholding in a childcare business called Koru Kids, which was due to benefit from a policy brought in by the budget. The Standards Commissioner also found that Sunak should have declared the interest when asked about it in a select committee. The Guardian say they have identified 17 shareholdings that have been held by Murty or her venture capital company Catamaran Ventures UK at various points during Sunak's time as Prime Minister or as Chancellor, none of which he voluntarily disclosed. Koru Kids is the only one to have been declared. Some of those not previously in the public domain include a health and beauty range based on Chinese medicine called Elemental Herbology, luxury jeweler Fenton's, a fashion website Luxfix, and a now defunct gym business called Resonant Frequency. Catamaran Ventures is funded by Murty personally through a £4 million interest-free loan. It recently announced that it was being wound down. None of Sunak's father-in-law's business interests or his wife's £600 million plus stake in Infosys, a major Indian IT company, appear on the Prime Minister's public register of ministerial interests. So, William, that was just a very long list of all of the different financial pies that Sunak's wife has fingers in. Do you think that this is a case of misleading funds, misleading the public? Do you think that it's dishonest or intentionally shady?
Well, it's very difficult to tell because so much either looks or can be made to look shady about what has gone on with the funding of things ever since the pandemic by the Tories. And the arrangements that they've sort of come into. I think probably it's a minor sin compared to the fact that the 600 million investment in Infosys isn't on the register of interests either. His wife may or may not be entitled to privacy, but the register of interests clearly states that spouses, under certain conditions at least, have to have their interests noted as well. And you mentioned Koru Kids. That came up because of a change in the budget that affected them for the better. So I don't think there's total transparency here. There is also a question about why go for venture capital in the pandemic? Why not just if you're going to use public funds, why not just put them into otherwise perfectly sound businesses that suddenly found themselves with an insurmountable challenge and keep them alive because they have the wherewithal to survive better afterwards? Why go for venture capital, which is the riskiest of all? And of course, one possible answer is, well, the then Chancellor and now Prime Minister's wife was involved with venture capital. I'm not too worried about the British public holding a stake in a luxury underwear company, because I suspect that one, like the three preceding companies that got money from this future fund that Ms. Murty was involved in, will go bust. The fact that its loan has already been converted into equity would suggest it can't pay back its loan. So I don't necessarily think that Rishi's wife is making an awful lot of money out of it, but there is a lack of transparency, and it's very, very symptomatic of the sort of thing we see all over the place with a lot of the COVID funding of various sorts, but with so much else. And it really needs a clean sweep and a new broom. And maybe we just ought to be a wee bit more transparent about where the money is going in this very unequal society in which we live.
Yeah, I think that really highlights it. So voting is underway in the Mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth by-elections, which could be crucial in determining the electoral fate of Rishi Sunak. The Conservatives are defending majorities of nearly 25,000 in Mid-Bedfordshire and close to 20,000 in Tamworth, which would normally point to an easy hold. However, their chances are severely reduced by the party's poor polling ratings and records of departing MPs. In Tamworth, Chris Pincher, a former Deputy Chief Whip, stepped down from his seat after losing an appeal against an 8-week suspension from Parliament for groping 2 men at a private members' club in the summer of 2022. Tamworth is a straight fight between the Conservatives and Labour. The latter held the Staffordshire seat between 1997 and 2010 when Pincher was first elected. Sarah Edwards, the Labour candidate in Tamworth, is the bookmakers' favourite to defeat the Conservatives' Andrew Cooper, but this would need a swing of more than 21 percentage points. Cooper has come in for criticism for saying that benefits should not be used for luxuries after it emerged that he had shared a Facebook post which said unemployed parents should only get help if they gave up phone contracts. The Mid-Bedfordshire vote was triggered by the resignation of former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries in protest at her lack of peerage from Boris Johnson's resignation honours. Her protracted departure drew attention to her seemingly limited involvement in local affairs. In the Mid-Bedfordshire contest, both the Liberal Democrats and Labour have flung huge resources at the by-election in attempts to win. Labour came a fairly distant second to Dorries in the 2019 election. The Lib Dems say that they are better placed to win due to the seat's largely rural demographics and the need to tempt Tory. The three-way contest makes it possible that even a fairly demoralised local Conservative group and their candidate Festus Akinubose, the local police and crime commissioner, could win. Losing both by-elections could be disastrous for Rishi Sunak and another pointer towards defeat in the general election next year, while holding one or both seats could be trumpeted by Number 10 as a resurgence for the Prime Minister and the Tory party fortunes. So would you agree, William, that these by-elections are almost like a litmus test for the general election next year? Do you think that Rishi Sunak will be hotly awaiting the results of these by-elections?
Well, certainly the opposition parties are making a lot of effort, and I dare say there will be some tactical voting involved. I'm very much a sceptic about by-election results being a pointer to what will happen in a general election. I said that not here, but I said it in other places after the Rutherglen by-election. I don't believe it's necessarily a pointer to what will happen in a few months' time, and I'm not convinced that it will be here either. I think the Conservatives are incredibly strong in Mid-Bedfordshire, which they've held since the days of Ramsay MacDonald and Stanley Baldwin. And I do think that the proverbial block of wood would get in. And in some cases, and I'm not mentioning names here, might have been a more effective MP than the actual incumbent. If anybody displaces them in Mid-Bedfordshire, I would expect it to be the Lib Dems on a strong tactical vote. But tactical voting does not happen to anything like the same extent in a general election. Neither, I should say, does the party, or any party, being able to pour as much energy in the seat as they would for a by-election. If when you're concentrating on one thing, you can just shove the resources at it. That doesn't happen in a general election. I think the Tories know they've had it in the general election. I'll be very surprised, unless Labour does something immensely self-destructive, I'll be very surprised if the Tories win next year. Now I'm putting my head on a platter for what actually takes place. So I think they will do their best to get whatever propaganda value they can from whatever result they can get. I suspect they will possibly hold Mid-Bedfordshire. I think they will lose Tamworth. And, you know, there's more to come. Peter Bone's on the way in his seat, and he may well have a recall petition. But everything will come out in the wash with the general election. And I think the Tories know they're doomed, and they're just going to get as much as they can for themselves before the inevitable axe falls.
And do you think that they'll hold on to Mid-Bedfordshire because of the split in the left vote between Labour and Lib Dem, or do you think that they've just got such a strong hold there?
It's very. I think it's because of the stronghold. Because I don't think there will be that much of a split. There will be a strong tactical vote, which I think will go to the Lib Dems. But I think the polling suggests that they're going to do okay in Bedfordshire. I think they've had it in Tamworth. I hope I'm not breaking any electoral rules by saying these things. By the way, are there any people in these places watching Broadcasting Scotland? I doubt it.
Not sure. I don't know how big our demographic is down south. I'm not sure. So we'll move on to our next story of the night. Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who died in police custody in Iran last year, sparking worldwide protests against the country's conservative Islamic theocracy, has been awarded the EU's top human rights prize. The award, named after the Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov, was created in 1988 to honor individuals or groups who defend human rights and fundamental freedoms. Sakharov, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, died in 1989. Other finalists this year include Vilma Núñez de Escoria and Ronaldo Alvarez, two emblematic figures in the fight for the defense of human rights in Nicaragua, and three women from Poland, El Salvador, and the US leading the fight for free, safe, and legal abortion. Mahsa Amini died on the 16th of September 2022, 3 days after she was arrested for allegedly violating Iran's mandatory headscarf law. The European Parliament President Roberta Metsola said that the day will live in infamy, and Amini's brutal murder marked a turning point. It has triggered a women-led movement that is making history, Metsola said, as she announced the award of the prize to Amini and the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran. The world has heard the chants of women, life, liberty, three words that have become a rallying cry for all those standing up for equality, for dignity, and for freedom in Iran. The protests, which spread across Iran following the death of Mahsa Amini, led to a violent crackdown by the Iranian authorities, in which more than 500 people were killed and 22,000 detained, according to human rights groups. So, William, would you say that this, the protest that has spiked, it provoked, and the award, the symbols around it, the prize for solidarity, you know, what more can be done by the international community for Iran, as more than just sending messages of solidarity to the protesters?
I'm really not sure because it's an intractable problem. The winners of the Sakharov Prize are invariably people who've been really through the mill. Nelson Mandela's a previous winner. Malala Yousafzai won it, and I think last year it was awarded to the people of Ukraine as a whole, who have certainly been through the mill. And Mahsa Amini certainly, you know, an absolute nonsense charge to our ears, isn't it, of breaking the dress code, which was punishable by prison, and then she died in prison. And of course, her family says she was killed, and the authorities say, oh, no, it was some undisclosed medical condition. It did spark big things in Iran, but they were put down. Somewhat more heartening is the spark it's lit worldwide, and I think that's quite an important thing. And hopefully, somewhere, somehow, it will make things different. In Iran, I don't wish to put a damper on things, but I believe they have just passed a law making the penalties for breaking the dress code even stricter, with imprisonment potentially of up to 10 years. So that's not a society that's going in the right direction anywhere fast. So, you know, I wish the international community could do more just to bring a little bit of justice and sanity to the world in these areas. But, you know, we live, as we know, as we've already heard in so many ways, in a highly, highly imperfect world.
Highly. So our next story, the ex-president Trump's former lawyer, Sidney Powell, has pled guilty in the Georgia election interference case in Fulton County just days before jury selection for her trial was scheduled to start. Powell was charged alongside Donald Trump for conspiring to overturn the 2020 election results in the state of Georgia. However, today she entered into a plea agreement to become the second defendant to plead guilty to misdemeanor charges and cooperate with prosecutors as a state witness in the criminal case against Trump and his co-defendants. Powell was sentenced to 6 years probation and a $6,000 fine, and she was ordered to pay $2,700 in restitution to the state of Georgia. She will also have to write an apology letter to the citizens of Georgia and to testify truthfully at trial, perhaps the most significant outcome of the plea agreement. The move marks a major victory for the Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis, who secured Powell as a state witness just days before the start of her jury selection for trial. Trump had been charged with 91 felony counts across criminal cases in New York, Florida, Washington, and including the 13 counts, including racketeering, forgery, perjury, filing false documents, false statements, and others that he is currently facing in Georgia. So do you think, William, that this is the beginning of the end? Do you think so? Two of the initial defendants have entered into a plea deal. Do you think that there are going to be more to come?
I think, it's always very difficult with Donald Trump to say it's the beginning of the end because it somehow never is. However, Sidney Powell had to plead guilty and accept a felony charge as distinct from a racketeering charge because previously Scott Hall pled guilty and basically incriminated her. Now, she has been in some of the really big meetings where some of the most brazen things happened with Donald Trump, and specifically, she is potentially in a position to incriminate Rudy Giuliani. And he's the fish they're looking for next, I suspect, because if Giuliani then cops a guilty plea and incriminates Trump, then things might be getting somewhere. And so the dominoes are beginning to fall. But it's a kind of a race against time because I don't actually think it's ever been tested what happens with a president who gets elected while either facing or actually found guilty of a criminal charge when that takes place. I don't think there's anything to stop the president taking office. And of course, he can pardon himself for federal crimes, I believe, but perhaps not for what we're talking about here, because I think the Georgia court has been quite careful about making it, if you like, a local thing that's down to the state, and he doesn't have the jurisdiction to do that. So it will still hang over him, and there may be various constitutional things, like perhaps the 25th Amendment, I don't know, but I suspect that his fate will not be sealed by this, and his distinct inability to express embarrassment in any way will stand him in good stead when it gets really quite heated and the next domino falls. But no, not the beginning of the end. Maybe the end of the beginning. Let's wait and see with that one too.
And so what do you think could happen on the campaign trail as this trial unfolds and Trump runs his presidential campaign?
Trump will portray himself as the victim with losers and hypocrites and evil people against him all the way. And his supporters, in general terms, show no signs of stopping backing him. In fact, if anything, it will increase his support. And that's really the chilling and frightening thing, because we seem to have moved into this sort of mirror world where the most egregious breaches of the law and of justice are just seen as evidence that this is the guy for us. This is the guy who'll bring our cause back to the fore and will make America great again if this is what greatness is measured by. So I think the campaign trail, he will actually use the legal proceedings to work in his favor. If I were that sort of unprincipled guy, that's what I would do. I'm not really a major on unprincipled stuff, but it's certainly what I would do, and I think he will do exactly the same. And regrettably, I think he will succeed.
Well, I guess only time will tell on that one. So we'll just have to wait and see the events unfold. So we're moving back to Scotland now. The Scottish Government has unveiled its priority actions, which are intended to deepen and strengthen cooperation between the Scottish Government and business. A new implementation plan sets out how recommendations from the New Deal for Business Group will be taken forward over the next 18 months to improve policy preparation and delivery and build a well-being economy. Actions include a forum to oversee the impact of regulations on industry and a full review of how government policy is developed to ensure businesses are consulted at all stages, particularly when new regulation is a potential outcome. Work will also start immediately on helping more parents and carers to get back to work. Other measures include keeping non-domestic rates reforms under review to ensure they support businesses and communities, developing new ways to assess the impact of regulations on businesses, ensuring the right business voices are involved in policy development, seeking views on health and work, flexible working, and just transition plans from across the business sector, outlining and measuring how business contributes to a well-being economy, assessing the type of support businesses are seeking to help government better understand their needs. Well-being Economy Secretary Neil Gray said the New Deal for Business presents a new and exciting long-term commitment to partnership to create the conditions where businesses feel empowered to invest and innovate and to provide good jobs. By ensuring an open and honest dialogue between business and government, we can provide certainty and consistency for business across Scotland. From small high street firms to largest multinational companies, I am grateful for the commitment shown by business to New Deal and to group members for developing the recommendations which are now agreed actions. Only by working together can we turn the dial on business-government relations and deliver a well-being economy, creating the best possible place for business, people and the planet. Dr. Poonam Malik, the head of investments at Strathclyde University, who co-chairs the group with Mr. Gray, said, "Listening actively to business and working in meaningful partnerships on common goals will reap rewards and grow our economy ambitiously for the benefit of all Scotland." So how important, William, is industry and business in Scotland as a nation developing its own economy?
I think it's highly important, particularly small businesses, and if they can be supported better, but also if they can be supported to run an environment that is consistent with well-being, so to offer good jobs and support for their staff, and to offer benefits to the community rather than just making money. That's how it sort of works its way into the idea of a well-being economy, I think. It's by no means the only strand of the well-being economy, and I'd like to see more and more strands of the well-being economy develop. But this is a start, and yeah, I think it will be quite an important one. Relations with business have not always been great with the Scottish Government in recent years, and particularly things like the ill-fated deposit return scheme have caused some statements to be made that do not exactly support the government position, and perhaps some money wasted by some companies who were relying on it happening. So there are bridges to be built. And I suppose one of the things I would say is important here is that this is very much a Humza Yousaf thing. This is stemming from the plan for the economic transformation of Scotland by 2025 that came in just after he was elected. And so the new business group was given 6 months, I think, to come up with some recommendations, and those recommendations are now being put into practice. It'll be interesting to see the response from the business community. And hopefully it will lead to smoother relations and we can get on with making the place better rather than just throwing daggers at one another. I think it's a good step. Let's just hope that it's actually underpinned with action and a bit of success in its objectives.
And we're staying with Scotland for our final story of the night. The First Minister has announced support for a disabled children's charity. This charity supports disabled children and young people and their families, and it's set to receive up to £2 million of future funding. Hamza Youssef made the commitment during a visit to the Yard's head office in Edinburgh, where he met with children and their families who benefit from the charity and saw the adventure play facilities offered by the centre. Subject to the outcome of the Scottish budget process, the Scottish Government will look to provide extra funding to the Yard over the next 3 financial years. The First Minister said, "I'm absolutely committed to improving outcomes for disabled children and their families across Scotland. Visiting the Yard has given me the chance to see their outstanding work firsthand and hear more about the support being provided by the charity. I was extremely impressed with the flexible and creative ways in which the Yard are offering services and support to disabled young people and their families, many of whom I know are facing additional and significant challenges. I sincerely hope that this vital funding will enable the Yard to grow their services and offer support to more families of young disabled children across Scotland. And I look forward to continuing to engage with the Yard in all of their families' support centres in Edinburgh, Fife and Dundee." So, William, this very much follows a trend that we saw in Aberdeen in Hamza Yousaf's speech and all of the provisions that he laid out. There's a massive focus and a drive within the SNP right now on social justice, on social welfare, on the well-being economy. This is obviously a continuation of that policy. Do you think that the timing of launching this was intentional to be immediately after his speech at the conference?
Well, it may be serendipitous that it is. I don't think so. I think this is actually an example of the Scottish Government listening, because the Yard was involved in a campaign to try and bring about fairer funding for charitable organisations, specifically themselves. And in fact, they'd roped in some opposition leaders to sign a letter, because basically their funding had been at the same level since 2016, when they had been able to help 550 children or young people, and now they're up to 2,300. So their effective funding per child had gone down from something like £163 to 89 or something like that. Now, with the 2 million over 3 years, it goes up far beyond that. And it's a very direct and very speedy response to the letter that was sent. And it's good to see evidence that the Scottish Government is listening to folk with concerns, because I think it will very potentially be transformational for the Yard, which does offer a very sympathetic and innovative approach to children with disabilities and their families. And importantly, their families are very, very much part of that. And he talks about them, Hamza Yousaf, about expanding to bring in other children, which is exactly what the Yard's been doing. So it's built in some room for further development in those lines. So I think it's to be commended very much. I don't think it was just planted to be just after the speech. I think it is actually the Scottish Government in action, reacting to the situation they find and making things better.
And do you think that there's many other issues that have been brought to the attention of the Scottish Government that they have been needing to listen to? Do you think that this is something that we'll see again in the near future?
I hope so. Um, it's just a straw in the wind at the moment, but I think there has been a problem with the Scottish Government listening. Not all the time, but some of the time in the last few years, and a lot of support has maybe drifted away because of that. I would like to see them rebuild. I think Hamza Yousaf thus far has had a lot of problems to deal with, and he's had a lot of flack too. But from what I can see, he's actually doing many of the things that he should be doing, and he's doing the right thing. And maybe eventually people will recognise that that's the case. Whether it's enough to change the overall political wind is another matter, but it's certainly something that's good to see.
Well, that is it for this evening. Thank you so much, William, for joining us in the studio. Hope you enjoyed your time on Broadcasting Scotland.
Oh, yes, as ever.
Always a pleasure, always a pleasure. So before I go, I just wanted to remind you, here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our viewers. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who's already signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programs will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our goal to reach £30,000 target is pressing as we need to pay our bills. However, your generosity has given us just a little bit more time. We've now raised over £19,200 and we are able to continue making programs for the next few weeks only. Our need to raise the remaining 10,800 is still really urgent, really, really pressing. So please subscribe and donate if possible. I've been Saoirse Healey. Good night and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healey.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.